Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
And
Guten Tag.
we'll do have like our open conversation. And for those that have never heard of Warenghem Distillery and your whiskey, Armorik, maybe you can just say something how it came to happen. And actually, I can basically start with with a question from one of our friends in Germany, because he asked me between Cognac, Armagnac, and Calvados, making whiskey here must be like being Asterix surrounded by Romans. And why do you do it, and how do you decide to make whiskey here?
Yeah, so maybe first thing to answer that question is, now at first we felt like Asterix. Now it's a little bit more common to have whiskey in France. I think there are up to almost 100 distilleries now, and 150 brands of French whiskey. 100
whiskey distilleries?
Yeah. 100 whiskey distilleries.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I have to find them.
So right now it's getting more and more common. At first we felt like Asterix, but to come back a little bit on the story about the distillery, it started in 1900. It was founded by Léon Warenghem, a guy who came from the north of France, and he settled here in Lannion to build a distillery to make liqueurs, like plant liqueurs. The first product we had at the distillery was called Elixir d'Armorik, and it's a bit like Chartreuse for those who know about that famous French liqueur. So for almost 80 years, we had Léon Warenghem, his son Henry, then the last one, the grandson, Paul-Henri. And Paul-Henri, he partnered with my wife's grandfather, that was Yeun Elez. And together they moved the distillery from the center to the site where we are right now. But then we were only making liqueurs at that time, so blackcurrant cream, a strawberry liqueur, Elixir d'Armorik always. And then in the early 80s, the distillery was really not doing well, and the son of Yeun Elez joined the company, Gilles, so he's my father-in-law, and he basically changed everything. His idea was to make sure that the distillery was a small regional distillery. So the only reason for which there would be a regional distillery would be for making regional products. So from the liqueurs, he started to develop mead, chouchen, so a wine made of honey, which is very, very popular and very typical from Brittany. So it kind of, saved the distillery.
Okay.
Then he got interested into apples, like apple brandy, like Pommeau de Bretagne. We're not making cider, but all the other apple-related products we do. And then he had to find the one product that would give a future to the distillery. Yeah. And at that time, he realized that France has always been one of the biggest world whiskey markets. Yeah. I mean, I think it's still one of the first Scotch whiskey export markets as of today. So France is a huge market for whiskey, and if there is one region in France where it makes sense to make whiskey, that's Brittany, because we have the same Celtic roots as the Irish, the Scottish. Yes. So that's how the idea came to start the distillery. And if I'm correct, we were one of the first in Europe, outside of Scotland and Ireland, one of the first in Europe to start distilling whiskey. That was 1983, and the first bottles were sold in 1987. Our blended whiskey called WB, because at that time the French market was 95% about blended whiskeys. Yeah. And a few years later, when he saw that was working quite well, he decided to build a proper distillery. So the distillery you visited this morning was actually built in 1993. And it was the first distillery dedicated to distilling whiskey in France. And from that time onward, we launched Armorik as our first single malt. So yeah, that's pretty much the story of the distillery.
Cool. Does the name Warenghem mean something? Is it like a...
Not that
it's a name.
Yeah,
but it has not a meaning.
No, not that I'm aware of, but it's just the name of the family, the founding family.
Yeah.
And it's a typical Flemish name.
Flemish name, yeah. It didn't really sound like a French name, or...
No. Some people are confused. They think it's from Alsace.
Yeah.
Some think it's from the northern area of France, but if I'm correct, just across the border in Belgium, there's a village called Warenghem.
Okay.
Which is we just have the H, but
makes
they
sense.
don't have it.
Yes, it makes sense. He was from the north,
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Another question that actually I think you answered just before we started the interview. We talked about this from the question before was from Ollie from Dramgood. They do like a whiskey podcast in Germany. It's a really good whiskey podcast for in German, obviously. And he asked as well that the French, since the French drink a lot of whiskey and a lot of Scotch whiskey. But he only saw the Scotch in the supermarket. He asked if most of Armorik single malt is consumed in France.
Yeah.
So it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really something we're actually quite proud of.
Yeah.
Is that usually when you talk about France and French spirits like Cognac, Armagnac, Calvados, most of these spirits are actually for export markets. Okay. Cognac, I think they export up to 96% of what they produce is actually drunk somewhere else in the world.
Yeah.
At Armorik, at the distillery, it's completely different. 70% of our sales are actually in Brittany itself.
Great. That was my personal additional question to his, not just about France but about Brittany, because since you're obviously very proud to be a Breton distillery, and we have to talk about the Breton whiskey thing as well in a minute. It was my question not about just how it is consumed in France, but how much of the consumption would be actually in the region. Because I saw it in some pubs, I saw it on the shelves, which is great to have like a local whiskey.
Yeah.
So it is. You would say? Can you say that roughly for numbers? Do you not have numbers about that? Like you said, 70% is French, basically consumption.
For us, 70% is Brittany, 20% would be France.
Okay.
The rest of France.
Okay.
And then 10% on export markets.
Only 10%.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. It's not that much. I think it's growing, but it has never exploded. Germany is actually our first export market.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. And but it's growing. But I think on export markets, no one is really waiting for a French or a Briton whiskey. I mean, obviously in Brittany, people are very proud to drink Briton whiskey. Yeah. In France, more and more people are getting interested in drinking Briton or French whiskey. On export markets, in Germany, you have German whiskies, you have whiskies from all over the world.
Yeah.
So French whiskey is just one of these world whiskeys.
Yeah.
So I think that's why the export it's slow for us.
Yeah. Do you think it's maybe as well because, like you said, France in the cliche way of outside looking onto France as a German, for example, France is more famous for wine, for cognac, for Calvados. There's many different things that France is very famous for, but whiskey is up until this point not really one of them.
Sure. So that's why you should drink Briton whiskey.
Yeah.
Because actually Brittany is one of the only region in France where we don't have any wine. Obviously we don't do cognac, we don't do Armagnac. Yeah. So the main spirit in Brittany is whiskey. So that makes sense.
It's very good. And I'm working for spreading the word basically. But you actually, I heard this today. I've heard it before, but I wasn't really certain about how clear this is. You actually made Breton whiskey a protected regional brand, right?
Yes.
Like in terms of like Scotch can only be made in Scotland, Irish whiskey can only be made in Ireland, and Whiskey Breton is now a protected title. Yep. So it can only be made in Brittany, right?
Absolutely. There are only 4 protected geographical indication, that's how they call it. You have Scotch whiskey, Irish whiskey, Alsace whiskey, and Britain whiskey. So yeah, we wanted to, make sure that when it's written on the bottle, whiskey Breton or Britain whiskey, then you're 100% sure that it's been distilled in Brittany. It's something we're working on also on a French level, because today, a bit like in Japan actually, you can still find bottles where it's written French whiskey with a nice flag and produce of France. But most of what's in the bottle is actually not from France. So we're working on it. In Brittany, that's not possible. In Brittany, you have to distill it, mature it, and everything in Brittany.
And it actually has like a minimum fermenting range, right? It said like you have to be fermented for at least 3 days, which would be converted to 72 hours or something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's what we do at the distillery, 72 hours. But in the file that we had to submit for the whiskey Breton, I think the minimum would be 24 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole idea of the file, behind the whiskey Breton is to allow people to still do whatever they want, but to make sure it's made in Brittany. So the fermentation time can go from 24 hours to, I think that's 12 days. So if people want to make it short, they can. If they want to make it very long, it's also possible.
Yes.
You have 3 different types of stills that are allowed in Britain whiskey.
Okay.
You have pot stills.
Yes.
You have column stills, small ones.
For whiskey Breton.
For whiskey Breton.
Okay.
Yeah. And you have also the hybrid ones where you have a small column, but it's still batch distillation.
Yeah.
Like the Lomond stills, for example. So there's a lot of space for innovation and doing things differently.
Yeah.
But still, it has to be made in Brittany.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the most important thing.
But there's no subcategory in terms of single malt.
There is one single malt.
So
actually, in whiskey Breton, you have, a lot of whiskeys can actually go in that category, whiskey Breton. But then there is one subcategory, which is whiskey Breton single malt, where you have to have only one distillery, pot still distillation.
Thank you.
And malted barley.
I'm really happy about this, because personally, like, the people who know me know that I'm a huge fan of pot still distillation for single malts. I have tried many different single malts that have not been distilled in a pot still, and I personally feel that pot still is the way to go for a single malt. I mean, you can always play around, but I think this is really cool that you have sort of like the Scotch whiskey definition. It has to come from a pot still if it is a single malt. And what I heard on the tour, which made me very excited, 2 things actually. You have a blended whiskey that is made from a blend of malt, single malt, and from wheat whiskey, which is not that uncommon, but you produce your wheat whiskey in your pot stills, right?
Yes.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
Is it possible to try only the wheat whiskey? Do you sell that, or is it like a...
No. We never sold it. It's actually an idea in the back of my mind for years. I would love to launch a single grain.
It's very uncommon
from our stills.
Yeah.
But time flies.
Yeah.
You never have time to do everything you want. But so it will come one day, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And also the other thing is that right now we're quite short in terms of grain whiskey stock.
Okay.
Like very short.
Yeah, so we don't want to give away too much.
We don't want to, so that's the problem. But at first when we started distilling whiskey, we only had these pot stills.
Yeah.
And we had pot stills because my father-in-law went to Scotland and he wanted to make whiskey as it should be, as the Scots defined it. But in Brittany, that was his idea at that time. So we only had these stills. So when we wanted to distill wheat, we had to use these stills. It might change in the future because we have a small column still that we use for apple brandy. And we can also distill grain whiskey in this column, but we will in the future we will probably have the blended whiskies for the supermarkets, where we will use the column still.
Yeah.
But we will keep that braise whiskey, which is that whiskey where we have the pot still distilled.
Is the one that contains pot still distilled wheat whiskey. Yeah. That's very
the one.
That actually explains a lot, because when I visited you guys in 2015, I tried the braise blended whiskey, and I was very surprised how thick and oily and complex it was for a blend. And I thought, like, it doesn't really taste like it tasted more like a blended malt to me.
Yeah.
And now that explains a lot, because the wheat whiskey basically came from the pot still. So that's very interesting. And the other thing that I was very excited about when I entered the distillery, that I saw that you produce a rye whiskey as well, which is because I'm becoming a very big fan of American whiskeys like bourbon and rye as well. And there's a great movement in Europe to produce rye whiskey in Europe as well, which I think is a very good idea, because I feel that this is a bit more personal approach from Europe to just say, look, we do the same like Irish and Scottish. We try to make a single malt that sometimes cannot compete. In your case, it can. I personally like. I'm not saying this because I'm here. I really like this brand. A bit of a fanboy as well, but I've tried some rye whiskey from Stauning, from Germany, Stark whiskey, for example. In Spreewald, they make amazing rye whiskey. Okay. And I feel that it's very interesting to have rye whiskeys in Europe as well. So you produce a rye whiskey that is matured for 8 years in sherry casks, as far as I know, and 2 years in virgin oak. Yeah. And it's sold. It's becoming sold out. It's like only here at the distillery, as far as I know, or it's still being sold.
It's a funny story, because it actually started when I first joined the distillery. I was having a training on the spirits world, and there I met someone who was preparing for a huge bartender challenge. Yeah. We were good friends, and one day he came at the distillery. We visited the distillery, and suddenly he stops in front of a cask and he sees Seigle, which is the French name for rye. Okay. I was like, wow, you have rye whiskey here, and you never told me. I never knew, actually, because these were all experimental casks that my father-in-law distilled in 2006 and 2007. So he said, we have to do something together and make a first French rye whiskey for the bartending world and so on. So the idea was, we distill the rye, we mature it for quite some time, but it doesn't taste like a usual rye. Yeah. So we would take the whiskey, send it over to Marseille, and in Marseille, they would mature it in virgin American oak. Mm-hmm. So it gets that typical taste from rye whiskies. And then we send it back to the distillery, and then we do the bottling and so on. So as I said earlier, it was a little bit, complicated to produce that rye whiskey. But we still distill it here, and we still send them some whiskey. Yeah. And then afterwards they would produce and sell their own whiskies. But
we'll see. Maybe for the future we will see what it will bring. But I will definitely take some bottles back, because it's amazing. I think the only rye that I tried to compare with this one is from Spreewald, actually, from Germany, near Berlin. Because up until this point, I thought they were the only distillery in the whole world that matures rye in sherry casks. Now I know they're not the only ones. No. You basically do it as well. But I think it's a great idea to do that, because in America, straight whiskey is limited to virgin oak, so they cannot play around with sherry or wine. But I think rye whiskey, a rye spirit, is such an interesting and spicy spirit that you can work a lot with different other casks.
Yeah, it has so many aromas in the rye whiskeys. Yeah, it's great.
I'm just checking if I find another question from one of our followers Timmy asked on Instagram, or Timmy asked on Instagram, how is your cask management, basically? Like I translated the question one-on-one, but then we can figure out what he maybe have meant. How is your cask management compared to the big Scottish players? I'm not 100% sure what it actually means in terms of like.
I think I understand the question. The thing, there are two main things. When we started doing whiskey, as I said earlier, it was like 35 years ago. So the information was not like today widely available. Yeah. So my father-in-law, he went to Scotland and he tried to kind of replicate what the Scottish were doing, but in Brittany. That was the starting point.
Yes.
I know today when you launch a new product, you have to innovate and reshape the world and whatsoever. But at that time, that was not the goal of the distillery. So that said, we use a lot of bourbon cask, ex-bourbon cask, sherry cask, pretty much like any Scottish distillery. And then we also have Brittany cask. Yeah. This is a local partnership we have with the last cooper in Brittany. Yeah. And he selects the oaks in the forest, local forest. He makes cask especially for us. And then we use these casks for the double maturation, for example, for the Armorik d'Herven also, which is available sometime. And to go towards the end of the story, we are right now trying to buy the cooperage and bring it back to the distillery. Yeah. Because actually the cooper is retiring. Okay. So it would be a shame not to have any cooper in Brittany. Yeah. So the distillery is investing in the cooperage, and we might find a cooper to run the cooperage for us. So that's one of the projects for next year. Very cool.
That would be my next question. It's probably quite hard to find a cooper in Brittany, right? And in Scotland, I know that they're actively trying to get new people to be interested in that, and it's a very long way to become a professional cooper. So
yeah, we might have a very nice opportunity, but it's a little too early to talk about it. But in France, there are not that many skilled coopers. Yeah. And our problem is just that we can't afford to have someone who is not, completely autonomous on cask making. It's not my business. I don't know anything about cask, So we have to find someone who is skilled. And the problem is that the cooperage in France, the big cooperage companies, they probably can pay skilled coopers much better than I. Mm-hmm. So my main goal is to find a Briton cooper who is happy to come back to Brittany and to be kind of secured by. He will have his own cooperage, but the security of the distillery behind it. Makes sense. That's the main thing I try to push on.
So I mean that's actually one of the questions I had for the end, but it's always good to have that because I want to ask like for the future, what's exciting things to be planned for the future, and I think that is a very exciting thing to have access 100% control over your own cooperage. That would be amazing for distillery. So. Sure. Probably what you could wish for as a whiskey distillery, to say like, this is our cooperage, we want to make the cask exactly like this. So that's very cool.
And I'm pretty sure, there's a lot to do for the relationship between whiskey and cask. The good thing of having your own cooperage is that you can do maybe 20 cask with a tiny little difference in the heat of the temperature of the fire. And it will have an effect on the whiskey, and we can play with that. That would be fantastic. But I'd like to come back also on the cask management thing. Another thing that is very specific at the distillery is that, again, we work a little bit like the Scottish. So we fill the cask, we put it in the warehouse, and then at the end we blend it. In France, it's really not that common to do that way. Usually in France you have maître de chai, which is kind of a warehouse master, while in Scotland you have master blender. So in France we tend to move the cask all the time, the spirit move all the time in the cask. You put it into a fresh virgin oak cask, then you transfer it to an older cask, then you blend it with other lots, and then you recask it. So the spirits moves all the time. In Scotland, it's not the way it's done.
Yeah.
Usually, there are some cask movements into in the life of the product, but usually you put the cask and you wait for it to mature, and that's what we do. But we can also do both when we feel like. The double maturation is typically a French way to do. You put the whiskey into one type of cask, Brittany oak cask, and then 3 years later you move it into another cask. So that's very French. The classic, for example, the whiskey matures in different ex-bourbon casks, and at the end we blend them together, which is more like a Scottish way of doing it.
Yeah.
And last thing maybe about cask management is also we have a lot of French wines and spirits cask that we use for single casks. We have Sauterne cask. I think last year actually we had a single cask 12 years old in Sauterne for Germany.
Okay.
So
we have
Malt cask, we have different.
It's great. It's very interesting. Since I forgot about when we talked about fermentation. I forgot to mention that you guys, because I said like a minimum fermentation. You guys actually have a fermentation about for like 5 days, right? This is a very, very long fermentation. I know that some whiskey geeks out there are very interested in these kind of things, like fermentation times and everything like that. But yeah, it's very, very interesting. So I hope that the question about the cask management is fully satisfied. It sounds very, very interesting. I'm just checking if I have any other questions from guys. No, that's like. So how would you basically describe the character of Armorik single malt?
That's something we worked on almost 10 years ago with Jim Swan, that you may have heard about.
Yeah.
He came at the distillery for 3-4 years to help us make sure things were in line. And at that time we defined the character of Armorik as very fruity and rich in terms of full body, in terms of kind of oily taste.
Yeah.
So that's Armorik. Armorik is rich and fruity.
Yeah.
And then with the cask, it can evolve towards something else.
Yeah, but the character, I personally like to. I mean, we used in many around the world whiskey tastings. I liked to use Armorik in terms of. For me, this is a really good example of, like you said, your orientation was Scottish whiskey, Scottish single malt, but still it has enough of its own character to, a very high quality in terms of like, we look how the Scottish make it, and then we have like our own stamp on it. And that is what I personally very much appreciate, because it's very hard, I think, for a producer to sort of, like you said, invent the wheel completely new. If you try something completely new, it might fail completely. It might turn out to be a product that does not work.
No.
And you don't want to be like a complete copycat of Scotch whiskey. So I think that I personally really like this approach in terms of we have the very high quality standards. You do you have organic barley from around the area and from France, and you have pot still distillation, but still your spirit is unique. You can taste it and say, okay, this is not a Scotch whiskey, but it's not so far away from a Scotch whiskey that you cannot identify. And I always like that there's some sort of salty kind of influence in it, which I think is cool, because from the location, Lannion is quite close to the sea. So that's one of the reasons I like the character of the whiskey.
But that reminds me of a funny story about when I started in the business like 12 years ago. The first shows I attended, people were always like, oh, no, it doesn't taste like whiskey. People, they just wanted the whiskey to taste like the Scotch whiskey. And now people are usually asking, what's different? Yeah, and
exactly.
It's just in 10 years' time, you know.
Yeah, it's very.
At first, you have to convince people that it tastes like whiskey.
Yeah.
And then 10 years later, it tastes like whiskey.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah, but that's what I think. It's very hard for. Since whiskey is such a long-term project, it is very hard to adapt to a very quickly changing market.
Sure.
So, like you said before, they wanted to be exactly the same. Now they want to be different. But I think that you guys have the advantage of having a bit of both. You know, you're having some character of classic single malt for the. In Germany, we have so many people that are very strictly limited to say like I like single malt Scotch whiskey and nothing else. And if they want to try something else, it cannot be too far away.
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting. But that's one of the reasons why I like to try everything and to drink everything, like everything that's distilled and come from a cask. I'll try it. I think it's very curious to have like these different influences and that you have a different approach to your blended whiskey as well, that the Brezes whiskey is made from wheat and from malt. I think that is very, very interesting. So I'll just have a quick look here, not to forget anything that I wrote down before. If you could start over constructing your distillery, would you change anything?
Oh. That's a tricky one. Yeah, probably.
Or you
probably I would change the location first.
Yeah.
I would go just next to the sea.
Yeah.
So that from my office I can look at the sea. That would be great.
That'd be nice, yeah.
Because for those who don't know the distillery, we're right at the entrance of Lannion, which is between 5 and 10 kilometers from the sea, so we don't have direct view on the sea, which I would love to have. But no, technically, I think today, if I had to change something, maybe I would have a little bit less of these, ex-bourbon sherry and more of the French cask, because we have a lot of, French wines, French spirits, which are, great when you're using with the whiskey. So, but otherwise, I'm actually quite happy with what we do, to be honest. If I had more time and more capacity, maybe I would try a little bit more different things,
Yeah.
Today we distill malted barley, we distill wheat, and we distill a little bit of peated malted barley. But that would be great to do a little more of the rye, a little bit of oat, a little bit of, everything.
Yeah.
And right now we are a little bit, there's a little bit of tension on the production, so we don't have that much time to do things differently. I would love to try a 10 days fermentation when you visit Springbank. Springbank is like mythical in the whiskey industry, and they do 10 days fermentation. What would Armorik be like if you double the fermentation time? So I'm sure we will do it one day, but I don't know when.
Yeah, but I mean, it's probably always the problem. You want to try new things, but you have to keep the production running. You cannot change things every day. So and Springbank is hard to come by, so it's not really always a good sign. I mean, they make great stuff, but for the retailers, it can be a bit of a pain in the ass as well to not have access to the product you want to sell. Exactly. The peated. You mentioned the peated whiskey. How was the name again?
So the name is Yeun Elez.
Okay, because my French is very bad, so that's always good to hear.
That's Britain.
Okay.
So it used to be a swamp right in the middle of the not the mountains but the hills we have in the center of Brittany.
Okay.
There's a lot of legends there.
And
it used to be a pit bog. Where people were selling, digging and selling the peat. Now we can't use it anymore; it's protected. But we thought it was a good name for a peated version of Armorik. And we work with a malting company in Scotland. And usually what we do, Armorik is 100% French barley, malted. Most of it is malted in Belgium.
Yeah.
And then we distill everything here. But then for the peated whiskey, we wanted to make sure that we work with, the people who know how to make peated malt.
Yeah.
So we work with someone in Speyside, and they send us the peated barley. And
so do you know where the peat comes from? Is it like the Speyside? Because it's like, I think Tom and Toole and Glendronach, for example, use the peat bog in the east East Highlands somewhere. I always forget the name, Port something, but it's probably their peat. And if it's a
I don't know exactly where the peat come from. The malting company is called Crisps.
Yeah.
I think they're in Dufton or Elgin, somewhere there. I don't know. I would assume that's island peat that doesn't come from the islands on the west coast, but. To be honest, I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Cool. So I will show you guys pictures of the bottle, so you know that is the peated version of Armorik. It was like when I saw it the first time. I did the entry for the Vic shop. I saw the bottle and I saw that very pretty bottle, and then it's a French whiskey. Oh, it's a peated whiskey. It's a Breton whiskey. Wait, is that from? Then I looked on the back. That's from Warenghem, and then I realized that it is actually your whiskey. Because it didn't say Armorik on the label, so I didn't know that it was from your distillery basically before, but it's very pretty. I will try it. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm very curious.
Our idea was to not just have a peated Armorik.
Yeah.
We wanted to create a new brand.
Yeah.
So that I think people can understand that Armorik is unpeated, and then Yeun Elez is.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Heavily peated.
Yeah, I mean that's like in Scotland, Tobermory and Ledaig, they do it the same way. Springbank do it the same way. So I think it makes sense for the customer to understand. Okay, so a bit of a not professional question in the end. If you would have to pick a bottle of whiskey for a very long vacation on an island, and you cannot pick one of your own brands, which one would it be?
Lately, I've been quite fond of the Benromac 15.
Yep.
I have a slight doubt about whether they changed the recipe recently. I don't know the answer, but the Benromac 15 from like 4 years ago. I really love that whiskey. Yeah. It's exactly what I want to drink.
Yeah.
It's to me, it's everything whiskey should be. And then maybe it's the Yeun Elez influence recently, but I bought another Ardbeg 10, which is one of the reference in terms of peat. You can't compete with that. Yeah. So I like this, but it's a tricky choice because I really like a lot of things.
I just had to laugh because you said Benromac 15, because that's one of my favorite whiskeys ever created in terms of there's so many influences in there, and that is one of the reasons why I actually would pick probably exactly the same bottle for a vacation.
So we can go on vacations together.
You can you can get everything from different aroma areas. Okay. Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. I will, try to get this up and running as soon as possible, and I will then hit the shop, and afterwards we'll see. Maybe I will give you guys some more details. Let's see what the road will bring, and definitely try some Armorik single malt, and I think we already have tried 2 or 3 different ones on the channel, and I'm pretty sure there's more to come, because I will probably come back with some more whiskey to try, so you will definitely have the opportunity to get some more reviews on our YouTube channel. And David, thank you very much for having me.
Much.
And I'll check the shop and see you guys next time. Bye bye.
Bye bye.